Hi there, welcome to another video from the Vickers MG Collection and Research Association. This one's going to be a long one because it includes a lot of detail and has taken quite a lot of research to come together. So what we're going to be talking about in this video is the evolution of what spare parts were carried with the Vickers machine gun from the earliest days of 1914 when they used a leather spare parts box like this, poor example in our collection, but we hope to improve on that, all the way through what was carried in the spare parts case, the wallet that exists within the case, through the wooden Mark II star boxes, and then through to the Mark III wooden box as well, and everything in between. So we have material that goes back to 1914. So we've gone through all of our parts lists, all of the manuals, and gone back to 1914. We go through 1917, 1918, two lots of 1918, 1923, jumps ahead to 1930, then we get into the Second World War with 1939, 41, all the various amendments, 1942 equipment regulations, 1944 G1098, which is the mobilisation tables. Different countries as well we'll be covering, so the UK obviously, but then Canada had some variation slightly, or maybe none at all, you'll find out in the video. Australia had some, India as well, so different variations of that into the Second World War. Their small arms training, say the G1098s, which is something people don't see very often, getting through to the 1951 infantry training manuals, those blue covered books, and then the 1960 South African version of that is our latest. We'll also have a special video on how the Australians used it in the Far East, in the Southwest Pacific Theatre, but that's going to be outside the scope of this one, so you'll have to wait for that one, but it's completely different, hence why it's going to be a different video. So we're going to be working through these, taking some snapshots. You'll be able to go to the website to get the full listings. All of this material is on there anyway, but we'll put it somewhere simpler for you to find. We'll be sharing the research we've done has been compiled and put into a list, so you can see these variations, what changed when. I'll try and explain some of why that may have taken place during the video as well, rather than just the images of spare parts, although I'm sure that's what many of you want. But please do make sure that you do try and watch it all the way through. It might take you a few sittings, I'm sure, because I don't know what this is going to be yet in terms of time, but considering the amount, I'm expecting an hours long video. We'll see what it is at the end. Look. But please do remember to like and share and subscribe to the channel. Support us on Patreon if you can, please. Those small amounts a month are really building up and really make it important, are really making it valuable to the collection at the moment, to the association, because we're not for profit. We generate our own income, and it's really important to make sure that we can do that at the moment while we're not having visits. So go on there, and there's additional benefits and bonuses as a result of that as well. But talk about us on Facebook, Twitter, and hopefully in 2021 we'll be able to see you, those of you that are able to get to Swindon in Wiltshire, you'll be able to visit the collection as well. So let's get stuck in, we'll get the parts laid out, and we'll start to work through these iterations. So here we have the contents of spare parts and tools for the Vickers machine gun as it was in September 1914. Now, September 1914 is where we have this listing here, which is the copy of an original that was found in a spare parts wallet. And we're going to focus on the wallet first before moving on to the case or the box. So the wallet, which is this leather pouch here, was later carried inside the case, but it appears to have been carried as a first aid kit by the number 2, so not the case itself, and that will become a little bit clearer because the case is carried in the spare parts box at the start of the Vickers service, so the wallet was carried as a first aid case, similar to how it was used with the Lewis. Now the contents of that are what's on the left hand side of the screen here, and we've got a cork for the plug, a cup muzzle attachment, the fusee with chain, so this is the fusee, the joint, and then the chain are the two linkages off of it. We've got 2 yards of flannelette being carried, so the cloth, 4x2 as it's commonly known, a jib number 2, and the number 3 exists later on, it's just a slightly different pattern of that. We then get the pin firing, one of those, and this is the number 1 firing pin with the heavier weight at the back of it. We get a pin trigger, which is the flat-headed one, and a pin tumbler, which has a small little rib on it. We also have a pin keep split 1/8 of an inch by 2 1/4 inches, which is for the Mark IV tripod. We have the protector muzzle. We have the sear with its spring here, which fits in the lock. We have a spring for the jib, and we have the 2 lock springs, and we've got the number 1 lock spring on the left and the number 2 lock spring on the right. We have a trigger here and a tumbler, and then we have the washers adjusting number 1, which is 3/1000 of an inch thick, and the washers adjusting number 2, which is 5/1000 of an inch thick. 3 each of those. And then the tools that were carried are the pliers, 6-inch set of pliers, the pull through here, the punches number 3 and number 5, and the reflector mirror MG that allows you to look down the bore, and the screwdriver small MG. Now this is all what's carried in the wallet in September 1914. And what we see, so the rest of the material is from the handbook listed in December 1914, and things start to change straight away. So the December 1914 list sees a number of different items added, firstly to the wallet, and then we'll talk about the case and the box. So the wallet list changes straight away. What we see is the 2 yards of flannelette taken out. We see the split pin for the tripod taken out, and one of the lock springs is also taken out. But what's added to that are some additional tools and some additional parts. So the tools that are added are a spring balance, a bush axis side levers, so one of the small lock parts. We then have the cup muzzle attachment is actually taken out of the wallet, and it's replaced by just a disc. So the disc is the disposable item that fits on the inside. So actually, if you're using the disc in the muzzle attachment, I assume that one of the reasons might have been that these are take off, clean, dispose, and the cups are saved. It's not quite the case, but clearly the cup does come out. It's worth noting that the cup that we're using here is a Mark II cup, and obviously in September 1914 that would have been a Mark I cup, which actually has a clamp rather than a screw, because the Mark I barrel doesn't have a screw fitting on the end of it. It's not cut for screwing the cup on, so it just clamps. And when we look into the equipment here, you'll see that some of the items relate to this. But yes, so they change from Mark I to Mark II, but we only have Mark II cups in the collection, but that's then what it remains the same for the rest of the war. The disc changes for the cup. You then have a pin T fixing, so actually you'll recognise these from the guns. Usefully always point this out, that this is actually, I think it's the number 3 punch size, number 5 punch, sorry. So you can use it to disassemble the lock. So that gets carried. You also have the bush, the split pin for the bush axis side levers being carried. Obviously, goes up there with the bush for it. You have the combination tool. Now this is the Mark I combination tool, and I mentioned about the clamp on the cup. That's actually what this square part of the combination tool is for. It's for undoing the nut of the clamp on the Mark I muzzle cup. So yeah, that's and the Mark I muzzle gland. So that's what that is for there. But obviously the combination tool was being carried there. You also have a clearing plug being carried. This is for extracting split cases in the barrel of the gun. So you put it in, close the lock on that. It spreads the arms here. These are serrated so that it cuts into the side of any of the brass that's in there, and you're able to extract the split case. So that was carried in the wallet as well. And then, whereas you've taken the flannelette out, it replaces it with 2 pieces of wire gauze. So let's put those there. And that's how it exists, the wallet, in December 1914. Now it's worth then running through the different parts that are carried in the case and the box. And as I said, the wallet would eventually be carried in the case, which is then carried in the box, so a bit of a Russian doll effect in this early period. But the case itself, so if you've got the wallet all packed up with these items on the left, the case itself just carries the wallet and then a complete spare lock, a complete spare feed block, and a funnel. And that's what goes in there. So one wallet and then these three parts here. Not much else. All of these other parts are carried in the box. Now, we've tried to assemble these in sort of alphabetical order from top left here. So we've got the boxes for tin for small parts, 2 of those. Another bush axis side lever, one of which is carried in the wallet as well. We've got as it says, the case would be carried inside the box, in the middle of the box there. You've then got the collar roller, another cork for plug, the cup muzzle attachment. This is a Mark II, but would have been a Mark I, as we said. You've got 5 of the muzzle attachment discs. Remember, this is December 1914 now, so we've got the muzzle attachment discs being carried. You've got ½ ounce of eyelets for repairing the bout. You've then got another fusee with chain. You have another jib. You have a hammer. Leathers as extractor, left and right. You also have the packing asbestos in 5-yard length. Now this isn't original asbestos packing. That's very fibrous, very dangerous. So we use substitute stuff in our display boxes. So you've got 2 lots of 5-yard lengths of asbestos there. You've got the pin axis trigger. You've got the pin axis tumbler. Let's say they were also carried in the wallet there. You've got another firing pin. So again, the number 1 type. You've got 2 pins fixing crank handle. So these go into the top of the crank handle and they're a pin but with a screwed piece on the top there as well. You have pins split fixing collar roller. So 2 short split pins there but quite thick. So they're what hold the roller onto the collar, which is at onto the side piece at the rear of the gun on the right hand side there. You then have pin split keeper bush axis side levers, so that matches up with the bush axis side lever there, goes through the middle of the lock. 4 of the pin split keeper check nuts long, which go in the check nuts that hold on the top, so the pins that hold the top cover and the feed block cover on. That's what these solve, and obviously for the cross piece as well, that's what they go for. 4 of those. You then have what we don't have and are substituted by these bits of cardboard here: piston check lever. I'll put a photo on the screen of this early type. It features on our Nepalese Vickers, but this is the piston is on the stop for the crank handle, and it stopped it slamming down so hard, it was sprung slightly. So it had a piston and a spring, and the springs are mentioned in a moment. But you carry 2 of these. They disappear off the guns as of 1915-16. So they're no longer in manufacture, and we'll see where these disappear straight away. You then have the bout plug for reaming the bout to refill it. You then have the plug cork. So not just the cork, but the plug, a little bit of chain with that and the cork on there as well. You have the plug's front cover catch. So this is for the front cover on front of the feed block. You have the plug screwed, so for the barrel casing there. The plungers for the front cover catch. You also then have a roller, so you say collar, and then this is the roller that the crank handle comes back onto. You have the, again missing, a screw clamping cup muzzle attachment. So for the Mark I muzzle attachment, you have a spare screw that then the combination tool socket fits onto. You have a large screwdriver, and remember the Vickers spare parts box large screwdrivers are flat handled so that they fit into the box. You have a spare foresight, a spare tangent sight. Now this is a later Mark II tangent sight, but the Mark I tangent sight we have on our early L series guns, and we don't have a spare of those. You then have the spanner shifting, so an adjustable spanner. Spring bottom pawl feed block. Springs check lever, which are the pieces missing because they relate to the piston check lever. Spring cover lock, so these two flat springs that appear at the back of, so when you open up the top cover. Springs front cover catch, so they go with the piston and the plunger there to replace those. Spring fusee with fittings, so this is the fusee spring on the left hand side of the gun and the fittings on the back of it. Spring jib, so the flat leaf spring. You then have 3 lock springs, 3 spare lock springs there, and obviously it would be the number 1, not the number 2. 2 spare spring safety catch with the piston, so that's what fits on the cross piece. 2 spare sear springs, so they go on the bottom of the sear there. You can see we've two spare of those little leaf springs. 2 springs sliding shutter catch, so that's the shutter on the bottom of the gun that you have to open up before firing. 2 spare springs of those. You have 2 spare springs tangent sight, so that's what makes this flip up and down. A big coil spring in there. 2 springs tangent sight slide, which relate to the Mark 1 muzzle, Mark 1 tangent sight slide. So like I say, that big spring there has a small leaf spring inside it. Sorry, the big knob on the side of the Maxim style sight has a leaf spring inside it that allows you to run the tangent sight slide up and down. We don't have those, so those are replaced here by a bit of cardboard. You get the spring top pawl and the spring trigger bar. You then also have 25 long strips for belt repairing, 25 short strips, the tool that enables you to use the eyelets with the strips to repair the belts, and that completes everything that's then carried in the box. So as I said, in the box, so this all fits in. Most of these small parts will fit into the 2 tins. The larger parts fit on the fittings inside the box. Now packing the boxes will come in later videos. This isn't going to cover packing them. But then in the middle of this box, you have the case with just these few items in, and all of these things fit into the wallet for the Vickers. So the wallet fits inside the case, which fits inside the box. And that completes December 1914. And we'll then go through how that changes into 1917 next, and then onwards and onwards. Now, as we start to look at 1917 and the changes here, it's worth pointing out that by this point of the war, what you will have done is seen the leather box here. So this is our example. So as I said, this has been gutted. We will restore it. We do have photos of the ingraft inside from another collector, but that was replaced by the wooden box. It's most people are familiar with. The Mark II wooden box here. But what's interesting about this example is this is an unconverted example. So this has the internal fittings that allow for the case to be carried inside. This example also has a contents list pasted in the top, but you'll start to see that this is made to fit a number of the changes that were introduced in 1917. So we're going to pop that there to show that it's now the wooden box in place. And what we're going to do is also swap out the Mark I case here, which has 1 of the leather loops and no metal reinforcing, for a later Mark I star case, which has been converted from the 1 leather loop to 2 leather loops, and has this metal band round that stops the lid coming open, and is therefore being converted for what we then start to see at the end of the towards the end of the First World War. Now 1917 saw a number of changes straight away, and the material that we have used for this is the 1917 handbook. So you'll be able to download these pages here if you want to replicate the 1917 lists. There's no point in going through everything again. We'll just go through the changes, and working from left to right, the changes there's no change in the wallet as it was at the end of December 1914, but the case now carries a oil can in there. So we have a can of oil being carried in the case. The spare parts box has 2 additional muzzle cups being added to it. Now these should be the Mark I muzzle cup. We've only got Mark IIs to demonstrate, but we've got 2 additional muzzle cups, and we have 2 additional, as a result, screws clamping cup muzzle attachment to go with those 2 muzzle cups. So we're just going to put those three together, three bits of cardboard to represent those. But what we do see removed is the pistons, the two pistons, and the two springs for the check lever. Because as I said, that change was made in 1915, and so we no longer see those being carried in the spare parts box. And then the final change we have is the addition of a split pin, a spare split pin for the muzzle attachment. So we'll just pop that one down there. It's on its little chain as well. So that's, as we see, the spare parts complete as they were in 1917 and described in the handbook for the Vickers machine gun. Now, as we move into 1918 and start to use the handbook from 1918 as our reference list, this one here, so on those small square-shaped handbooks again, gives us a nice detailed parts list. One of the major changes at this point is that the wallet and the case are no longer carried inside the spare parts box, and the spare parts box is now carried for every 2 guns, whereas previously it was for every 1 gun. So you have the wallet and the case for every 1 gun, and then in the limbered wagon, with every subsection, you would have the box for 2 guns worth of spares. So that changes things a little bit, and it starts to see some of the components moved around to match where they're likely to be used. So if they're needed to be used with the number 3, and up close with the gun, so the number 2 and the number would carry these, and the number 3 would do the repairs, and then the number 4 would bring forward parts from the boxes they needed to, or the number 4s of both gun detachments. So you start to see more first aid related items, and then the more spares carried in the box, but every gun no longer takes this box forward. So the changes we see are a number to change what's in the wallet as well. So we see the spring balance being moved and carried across in the case. It tucks into the fold of the wallet when carried loosely. We see the bush axis side lever being moved across and being carried in the box. We see the T-fixing pin there being moved across and carried in the box. We see the 2-wire gauze pieces being moved across to the box as well. So the box is starting to get quite full at this point. We also see the combination tool being moved across and carried in the case more loosely than inside the wallet itself, so it's more readily accessible. We see the muzzle protector being moved across into the box. We see the clearing plug up here being moved across into the case. And we see the pin for the bush axis side levers, the split pin, being moved across, so there's now 2 carried in the box itself. In the other direction, we see one of the muzzle cups move across into the wallet, and one of the screw clamping cups that goes with it being moved across into the wallet as well. And a lock spring, so we now have 2 of the lock springs being carried in the spare parts wallet. We see 3 of these split pins. These longer split pins, these are the 2 1/4 inch split keeper pins. We see 3 of those being carried in the wallet. They're for the mounting tripod repairs. So 3 of those go in. We see the feed block from the case move. Actually, I'm not going to move it too far, but it's going to move and exist in the box. We've seen obviously the spring balance come in, the clearing plug come in, and the combination come in. But we also now see 8 yards of flannelette being carried in the case. We see 6 ounces of plasticine or luting. So just a bit of cardboard here because plasticine goes hard. We don't keep it in the boxes, but just remind us. So we see this plasticine that actually between the flannelette and the plasticine, we see a first aid kit for barrel jacket repairs being made, and we'll see those formalised a little bit later on. But the plasticine and luting are much the same kind of thing. Sort of a clay that will become waterproof, but then wrapped in flannelette around the barrel casing. If it's split or cut at all, or hit by shrapnel, and we've got an example of that in the collection, that will form a watertight repair that enables it to carry on being used. Now, the other thing that we see added into the spare parts box is a spirit level. so that we can conduct overhead and indirect fire. Not as a clinometer, but we can start to work out whether the gun is laid properly. And every gun now carries a spirit level with it to make sure that it works well. So we start to see, we've these belt repair and tool remember. This is the edge of what's carried in the spare parts case. We're starting to see something we probably recognise a little bit more. Now in the box, we've seen move out a muzzle cup, a lock spring. We've seen the screw for the muzzle cup move out. We've seen the feed block move in. We've seen a bush axis side lever, a T-fixing pin, the muzzle protector, the wire gauze, and the split pin for the bush axis side levers move in. But we see some additions as well. And the first of those is one of these jamming blocks. It's on the front of the Mark IV tripod. So it's the jamming handle and the block itself. That comes and is carried in the spares within the box. We also see a packing gland. Now the packing gland can be used in case of damage to the muzzle attachment, so the gun will still fire. But it can also be used to just make sure that we've got the asbestos packing fixed properly if we take the muzzle attachment off, so it doesn't come loose. So this packing gland is then carried in the spare parts box as well. And like with the wallet, we see 3 of the split pins that are used for tripod repairs starting to be carried in the boxes as well. One of the most remarkable things though that we see at this point is the inclusion of the sights luminous fore and back. So these are the first type of night sights for the Vickers, and this little set has its instructions that you can see on the website as well. But we have the rear sight here that slides onto the tangent sight. And then we have the foresight that clips over the, it clips around the foresight ears on the front of the gun. It will come out of the box, it's in a little tiny box for protection. But there we go. So that clips over the front of the gun as well. So these start to be carried in every spare parts box for the Vickers. So they're part of the spare parts box, and therefore we've got one set for every 2 guns. Which is interesting because obviously you'd have a set of per gun, but we've got one set of these being carried for every 2 guns. So we're going to pop those down in there. What we do see removed though, compared to the 1917 list, is the split pin. The muzzle attachment split pin is taken out, no longer carried in the spare parts box. So there we go, that's April 1918 as we would expect to see the spare parts at that point. In September 1918 there was a reissue of the 1918 handbook, and some minor amendments were made to the list. So again, you can go and download the list and the whole handbook if you want to off of the website. And what we see, just a move really in the main case, so the muzzle protector for barrel cleaning that we moved from the wallet to the spare parts box goes back and is now carried in the wallet again. And we also see the split pin for the muzzle attachment that was taken out in the April edition put back in the September edition of the handbook. Some minor changes, but obviously this then represents how the spare parts were carried at the end of the Great War. Now, our next iteration is the 1923 handbook. So representing the first sort of interwar period, these small handbooks are still being issued for the Vickers and the spare parts contents are in there. Not much change when we get to this point, but some minor sort of recognition of how the parts are developed. So what you also have at this point is the Mark II box with its single compartments. If you remember, this is made to fit the spare parts case in there as well. What you'll have seen is the change from that between 1917 and 1918, when it was carried every 2 guns, to the Mark II Star, which is a converted box. And so this is one of our more complete examples. You can see that there's the fittings for the muzzle cups is reduced to 1 as opposed to the 3 that are up there, and we're carrying different spare parts boxes. So that'll all be explained in the moving around of the spare parts kits, but we now have this Mark II star box being carried instead of that Mark II. In terms of the changes to the components carried, we see the screw clamping muzzle attachment removed. We see those removed from the box, the two that are in there, and the one that's carried in the wallet. And that's because the Mark II muzzle attachment and the Mark II barrel are now prolific. They exist everywhere. We also see the springs tangent sight slide being removed as well, because we no longer need to carry these, because we've moved over completely to the later tangent sight slides such as this one here, rather than the earlier Maxim examples. And we see the what we would previously be calling the blocks jamming with screw and handle tripod mounting Mark IV is now just referred to as the screw clamp checking traverse, and that's being carried in every other box. So it's one per 2 guns, and then we have the belt plug here for reaming out the ammunition belt. That's still being carried in the boxes, but it's being carried in every 4 guns, so 1 per subsection, remarkably. Now, it's unclear as to why that would be, because you do need to use them to remount new ammunition belts, but perhaps what we're seeing is the fact that so many of the belts were worn and easily refilled by hand, or they're using the belt loading machine more than by hand, so they're using the belt loading machine more than the plugs. So those are the changes that are made for 1923 in the handbook as it's issued there. Now 1930 sees the next change. 7 years have gone by before the next handbook is reissued, but 1930 sees some dramatic changes learned over that period, and the spare parts that are carried then pretty much set the standard going into the Second World War. But what we see is the spirit level is removed from the case. There are no changes to the wallet, by the way, but the spirit level is removed from the case. And then we see some name changes to start with, really. So the case, there are changes to the wallet. The case, these split pins here for the tripod are changed from a 2¼ inch length to 2½ inch length. So a very minor change, but clearly one that permeates through. So yeah, they now change from 2¼ inches in length to 2½ inches in length. It's the box where we start to see the major changes, and this may well not all fit. It may well need some readjustment. So what we'll do is we'll just make ourselves a little bit of extra room up in here, because there are some larger bits carried. So we see, let's say these pieces now. That's our case. Those are still carried in the spare parts box. But what we see is an addition of another feed block. We now have 2 feed blocks being carried, and I've included a brass one there to show that we're starting to move from the steel examples of the early part of the Great War to the brass examples that appeared later on. This is the first opportunity to do that. We see a third small parts tin being carried. So let's turn those around like that, put that one in there. We've got 3 small parts tins being carried. We get 2 additional pieces of the 2 additional 8-yard lengths of the asbestos packing. So we now have 4 lengths of asbestos packing there. We have another firing pin, and I've included a number 2 type firing pin that, if you look, you can see the differences there. It's now a lighter firing pin, initially introduced for air service because it wanted a higher rate of fire. That slows it down apparently, but then could be introduced and used across the whole of all of the guns used with the Vickers. We have another of the T-fixing pins being carried as well. So we've got 2 of these being carried. Because remember that we've now got 1 box per 2 guns, so we're going to double up on a few items. We see the night sights, the luminous night sights being removed, so that small tin there, and replaced with a larger tin that contains a slightly different variety of the night sights at this point. So 1930, we're seeing this alternative design of night sights being carried. So let's pop that tin there that has the night sights in it, but being carried for there. We've got 2 more lock springs now being carried as well. So 2 more lock springs being carried. So 4 in total in the spare part box there. We've got another top pawl spring for the feed block being carried there as well. And we now have 6 washers packing nut for the elevating wheels. So these are the washers that are used for packing out the elevating joint in the rear there. So we've got 6 of these being carried, can fit in the middle there. And as noted, we have 3 of the split pins for the tripod, but those change from 2 1/4 inch to 2 1/2 inch, and we have another, we need to make a little bit more room in here, we'll have another 3 of those being carried from 1930 onwards, or certainly as of the 1930 list. We do see a few things change and get removed though. So we have 1 of the bush axis side levers removed. We have 1 of the muzzle cups, because now we can only fit 1 in the new type box, the Mark II Star. We have 1 of the muzzle discs being removed as well. We have 1 of the pins fixing crank handle being removed. We have the split pin for the bush axis side lever being removed because we don't have the bush anymore. We have 1 of the long split pins there being removed, or sorry, the little check nut split pins being removed. So we now only carry 3 of those. We have obviously lost the sights. We have 1 of the springs tangent sight being removed as well, which are these large coil springs there. And as I said, the 2 1/4 inch pins here have now changed to 2 1/2 inch, and there are 6 of them instead of the 3. So the 1938 standard, the 1930 standard pretty much sets the scene as it goes into the Second World War. With the start of the Second World War, we see the handbooks replaced with and the small arms training manuals combined, and we get the small arms training manuals now including the lists. And as always, these are available on the website. But this does, set out where the spare parts lists are now contained. There's very minor changes as we go into the Second World War, and all we really see is 1 additional piece of wire gauze being added to the wallet. Well, 1 piece of wire gauze, because we'd moved the 2 from previous into the box. So we've got 1 piece of wire gauze now being carried in the wallet. And we see the funnel here being removed from the spare parts case, because we now have a metal funnel being attached to the 2-gallon can and carried with that. So we don't need to carry the funnel in the spare parts case anymore. And on the listings, they show that the case is no longer considered part of the box. So if you'd ordered a box through the store system, you would have also received a case, but that's no longer the case. So the case is removed from the listings as well. But 1939 then is how we see the spares go into the start of the Second World War. As I'm sure you'll be aware, across the British Empire, the Empire and Dominion armies all used the Vickers machine gun, and they printed their own versions of the small arms training manuals. Now, those that we've compared against include the reprint of the British small arms training manual in 1941. So that's reprinted with amendments. There was then a complete reissue in 1941. The Canadians produced their own version of that, as did the Australians, and none of those saw any changes to the 1941 listing. It wasn't until the Australians printed a version in 1942 that we saw the screw clamp checking traverse being removed from the listings for the box. But otherwise, that was as it would exist across Canada, Australia, into, let's say, from 1939 to 1941. The only country that did make changes from the 1939 edition of the Small Arms Training Manual was India, with their reprint of it in 1940. And what they did was the screw clamp checking traverse that was carried one in every box. They set it out that it was carried in 3 of every 6 boxes. So remarkable, you know, 1 in every 2, but they specify 3 per 6 boxes being carried. They also are the first time they identify that these check pins here, the check nut split pins, are to be called pins split spare 1/16 of an inch by 1 inch. So they start to define the size. And what you also have is they start to carry 2 pieces of wire gauze, now just referred to as pull-through gauze. They carry that in the wallet. Otherwise, it remains the same. And their reissue of their manual in 1942 in 1941 doesn't change from that 1940 listing either. Now, if we just roll back to the UK 1939 example by merely taking away a piece of wire gauze, we can explain that the next changes come in the 1942 equipment regulations, which, as always, there's a copy available on the website, but these are set out slightly differently. And one thing that I just wanted to point out on this screen here is that we have 3 different types of filling for the case. We have A, B and C. Now, in this case, A is emergency spares for ground service, which is what we're covering. B and C are for armoured fighting vehicle use, and they have a different set of spares. They have emergency spares and maintenance spares, but that shows that the case was being used in armoured fighting vehicles to carry different types of spare parts. Now, by 1942, we've learned a little bit from the start of the war, and what we do actually is copy India's early example and add a piece of gauze to the wallet on mobilisation, because obviously the military are mobilised at this point, and we also add another pull-through, double, and that's a single, but for representative purposes, we put another pull-through there for the equipment regulations on mobilisation. And the A variant of the box, so that ground service, no longer carries the plasticine or the flannelette that would be used for waterback jacket repairs. So those are taken out as well. And part of that is because the first aid kit that we'll explain about at another occasion is starting to come into service. The final change from those 1942 equipment regulations is then the removal of this screw clamping check-in traverse. That's taken out of the listings for the box, and it's not clear where that goes, but I'm sure it'll reappear. So that comes out of the box in 1942. Now, the next amendment is issued in 1944, and those are issued in the form of G1098 mobilisation tables. The G1098 documents, separate ones here for the wallet, for the box and for the case, some of which have been amended, so we'll cover those in slightly different videos in a moment, or slightly different sections to record the date. But these are issued in January 1944, January 1944, and then March 1944. Now, they set out what is carried by different units upon mobilisation, which is when that battalion or that organisation is ready to move to war from its peacetime establishment. Now, what happens in the... they've learned a lot over those intervening years, and this represents actually the changes here are quite drastic, and they represent that sort of move of a fully mobilised organisation. And the British Army had learned a lot over its intervening years up to 1944. And some of the major changes, though, start with the removal of the Mark II box and its replacement with a Mark III box. The Mark III is the same internally, but externally you can see it's a simpler design with a wooden handle and the 2 simpler catches on the side of it. So we're going to replace that there. Just to show you that this is now 1944, and we're going to move from left to right as we always do, and just indicate a few things that change. The G1098 tells us that the pull-throughs that are carried in the wallet can actually be single, i.e. for the rifle, or double pull-throughs, as used with the machine gun. But one of those is removed, so we're going to remove. We'll take this single out to leave the double there. One of those is removed from the list. Alongside one of the pieces of wire gauze is removed, and the mirror reflector is removed, so there's no longer a requirement to visually check the barrel. And the 3 split pins for the tripod, the larger split pins, are removed as well. So those are the removals, but then we've got some additions, some changes. So we have the bottom lever on the feed block being added. We have the top lever. They're obviously finding that these were breaking, so they put put those parts in the spare part wallet. And then we've removed some split pins, but we're going to add some more in, and these are the smaller split pins, those 1/16 by 1 inch split pins. These ones here get carried in the wallet now. So we have 3 of those in there. In the case, we have a number of additions. Nothing's taken out, but we have some asbestos packing being carried in the case itself. We have a leather washer being carried in the case. Now this is the washer that seals the top of the brush that fits into the crosspiece, the handles of the crosspiece. So we have one of those being carried. And we also have the split pin. Now this is listed for the case, this is not a mistake, so this is listed for the case. The split pin is being carried in the case. Now that's the split pin that actually holds these 2 parts together. So the fact it's being carried in the case, I'm sure it would end up in the wallet, because these parts loose in that case are just going to get lost or damaged. So they're the additions to the case. There are a large number of changes in terms of what's carried in the box. As I say, probably born of experience of being at war at this point. And we'll go through the removals first to make us some space. We have 2 of the small parts tins being removed, so there's only 1 remaining. We then have the eyelets, these belt repair eyelets. These are being removed because we're no longer having to repair our belts. We're having stripless, the cloth only belts being issued in factory packed liners. We take out the muzzle gland, the packing gland here. We no longer have a requirement for that, probably because the muzzle attachment is being left on the gun all of the time. We take out 1 of the T-fixing pins. Now what we're going to do to show that our progression in war as well, our progression of what we're doing, is these short T-fixing pins, the Mark 1, don't actually fit through the dial sight bracket as well. So we're going to have to change that. And at this point of the war, they'd all be the Mark 2 T-fixing pins. So we change that and put that one in there. We then have the belt plug. We're not hand filling our belts either. So they come in factory packed. So we're going to take that out. We're then going to take out the plug, 1 of the plugs and 1 of the plungers for the front cover catch. So these 2 small parts here, we only need to carry 1 anymore. They realise that these aren't getting broken or lost. The night sights are being taken out as well. And that doesn't say the Vickers no longer has night sights, but it means they're being carried in the aiming lamp box now, not in the spare parts box. We also take out the belt repairing tool. We no longer need to carry that because we don't have the eyelets that ends up being put in with it. And we don't need to carry the long strips or the short strips that are used with belt repairs as well. So all of that material is coming out. We see the short pins here no longer being referred to as split check nut long, but as keep split 1/16 by 1 inch. So we've got 3 here and we've got 3 in the wallet now. And then we start to see what's being added back into the box. So in the box itself, we've got 4 pieces of wire gauze being added. So we've got 2 already, we've got 1 in the wallet, and we've got 4 more being added into the spare parts box. So we've got 6 in total and 1 in the spares in the wallet. So bear in mind, this is 1 for every 2 guns. So we've got 8 all around. We then see, and I mentioned it before with the plasticine and the lutein, we see the box patch first aid being carried. Now this consists of a number of clamps that go round around the barrel casing. So a piece of rubber material. This is a bit hard over the years. And a steel plate. So what you do is you put the rubber on first, you fix the steel plate over that, it starts to form into the barrel and produces a waterproof seal that then is tightened using the clamps. So these are carried in the middle of the spare parts box, and you'll find some boxes actually have a wooden bracket and a leather strap that fits in the top to secure that nice and easily. Now that can be put up there. So we've got that being carried. We then have an oil brush to make it easier to clean. We'll put this down here. Being carried, that's exactly the same as is fitted into those rear crosspiece handles. We have another cork. These break quite often, so it's surprising we're only carrying two. Well, plus one in the wallet, but we've got two corks being carried there. We then have 4 more pieces of asbestos packing being carried in the box. So that's 10 for every 2 sets of guns. Quite remarkable. There's 5-yard lengths there. We've got 2 more firing pins. Now these are resin casts of the number 2 firing pin. It saves us having to account for the real ones as component parts. So we keep those in our spare parts cases. So we've got those there. If anybody wants them to complete their spare parts cases, they're fully UK legal to own. So get in touch with us or visit our shop. We then have another bottom pawl spring being carried. So that's the sort of butterfly kind of spring for the feed block being carried there. We have 2 more springs for the rear cover lock. So 2 of these leaf springs being carried. 2 more, so that's 4 in total. We're basically doubling up on all of our springs in this here as we add another jib spring alongside that one. We add 4 more lock springs, so that's quite an increase from 4 already to 8 in total. Anybody that fires the Vickers will know those are incredibly valuable. They break regularly. It was the first piece I ever broke on a Vickers, and it was on a deactivated Vickers, so I had to get a gunsmith to make me another one. It was that long ago. These weren't available on a collector's market at the time. We then have 2 more safety catch springs, safety catch with a piston on it there, look. These are part of the cross piece, so we've got 4 in total of them. We have 2 springs top pawl feed block, so increasing that to 4 of those smaller those leaf springs there. And then we have 2 springs trigger bar being added as well. So those are the small coil springs that operate that trigger bar in the top cover. The other additions are, we've got our adjusting washers for our connecting rod carried there, but we have 4 of each type, number 1 and number 2, being added to the spare parts box at that point as well. So as you can see, quite a dramatic difference in the spares being carried in 1944 from just a few years earlier. So there's what I believe to be the experience of war, possibly, moving forward into what parts are absolutely necessary to carry near to the guns. And these were being carried in the section commander's carrier at this point. So the universal carrier, you'd have the spare parts case being carried with every gun in the gun carriers, and then the spare parts box being carried in the section commander's carrier for every pair of guns. So that's 1944 for you. Now, Amendment 1 to the G1098 was issued sometime afterwards, and you can see the changes in here. It made some slight amendments to the box, and it made some minor amendments, or there's Amendment 2 on this one as well. We believe that Amendment 1 is this piece down here, and then Amendment 2 is that one there. So we'll go through those. Not sure on the exact date on them, but sometime after 1944 and before our next iteration seems to be 1946. So what we see is the clearing plug being replaced. So this is the Vickers machine gun clearing plug, and by this point in the war there exists a standard 303-inch clearing plug that can be used for the light machine gun and for the Vickers, so for the Bren and the Vickers. So that's being replaced as a more standard item. We then see some additions, more additions for materials, but all relating to the tripod. So we see a chain for the crosshead, a chain for, for the joint crosshead pin, a chain for the elevating gear pin, and then the pins themselves. So we see, put that over there. We see the crosshead pin and the elevating joint pin being added, and the screw clamp checking traverse that has been in and out of this box for some time is added back into the box as well. So that, we believe, is Amendment 1. Amendment 2 to the G1098 only affects the case, and it adds 2 extractors. So as well as the complete lock, we add in 2 extractors into the case there. So we've got those as complete assemblies ready to be quickly replaced as needs be. That's Amendment 2, and we're not sure on the date on that one. Now, the last iteration of the small arms training manuals came in 1946, and this seems to actually reverse many of those G1098 changes. So it's unclear, though, as to whether that's as a result of this is just a peacetime establishment now rather than a wartime, or they disregarded the G1098 when updating the small arms training manuals. It's unclear as to whether they even, this is just almost the 1941 manual or the 1942 equipment regulations. It bears no resemblance to the G1098. So they may well have disregarded the 1098, never even looked at it, just updated the manual that they were issuing. So this is 1946. This is a set of amendments to the 1941 mechanical subjects part of the small arms training. So what we had removed was the levers. The feed block levers are taken out of the wallet. There's no need for those anymore. The pull through, another pull through, is replaced. It says it's only a double this time, but we've got a single there, and a piece of wire gauze is replaced. So we've got the two pieces there. You then have the reflector mirror back in, and you have the three larger split pins being put back in, but the three smaller split pins get taken back out. Ooh, not easy to pick up. So those are removed. You then have an additional item being added, which is a small oil bottle. So we have the oil bottles that are contained as part of the cross piece, the rear cross piece, but we have either, and there's an option in the manual, these rifle oil bottles. We have the Mark IV in brass and the Mark V in Bakelite, and one of those, so we're going to pick the Bakelite one of those is then carried in the wallet as well. So that's the real change, but we've got some oil being carried in the wallet itself. Now, from the case, we have the asbestos packing taken out. There's no longer any requirement to carry that. We have the two extractors taken out. So we only have the lock there containing a full extractor. We have the washer taken out, and we have the split pin for the feed block levers taken out as well. So that's almost exactly as it was, with the exception of the clearing plug. We'll leave that the 303 MG clearing plug there. We'll leave that one in rather than the plug clearing MG. The box, still we're going to be using the Mark III box here, but we see two of the pieces of gauze removed, so no longer have those. We see the oil brush removed. One of the cork plugs is removed. The four additional pieces that were put in G1098 of asbestos packing are removed. We then have the two additional firing pins, so we'll take those bottom two out. They're removed. We'll leave the two resin ones in there for now. We have one of the springs bottom pawl is taken back out, it's removed. Two of the rear cover lock springs are removed, like so. We have the two safety catches, the additional two that we put in the G1098 are taken out. We have the four lock springs taken back out. There's three, and that's the fourth one removed. We have the two top pawl feed block springs removed as well. Let's put those, straighten those back up. We have the two trigger bar springs removed from there, and we have one of the jib springs removed. We then see two of the washers removed as well. So we reduce these two washers, the larger elevating nut washers, reduced to just four of those. Now we have the washers adjusting, still kept in the wallet, but those from the spare parts box are removed, taken away. And then we also lose the tripod components that were carried with the, that were introduced in Amendment 1. So the 2 chains and the 2 pins all come out and are no longer carried. And the screw clamping traversing is carried in 1 per platoon. So that's 1 for every 4 guns now, rather than 1 for every 2. So probably carried either in the instruments box or possibly a spare parts box carried in the platoon commander's carrier. So there's an instruments box that carries like torches and things like that, 1 per platoon. It's likely to be carried in there as something, as a central item of stores. Now what we do have is some items then put back in to the establishment. That starts off with the 2 small parts tins there. Certainly makes it a lot easier to carry these wide array of small parts. We have the eyelets put back in because we're going to start being issued the strip type belts again for training purposes certainly. We have the gland packing being put back into the box. We have the T-fixing pin. Now we're going to replace the Mark 1 that we took out with a Mark 2 so it fits through the dial sight bracket as well, so that's longer, so we have 2 of those again now. We have the belt plug because we're going to start hand filling our belts for the purposes of training, maybe with drill rounds, things like that. We have the plungers, the plunger and plug for the front cover catch, so that feed block cover, top cover catch there. And we have the 25 strips long and the 25 strips short that enable us to make those bigger repairs on the belt. And we have the belt repairing tool that enables us to do so, all replaced into the spare parts box there. It's worth noting that these small split pins are now referred to as pin split check nut long again, rather than just pins keep split 1/16 inch by 1 inch. It's an interesting sort of change then, that we sort of move back to a peacetime establishment really for the spare parts box. Now the last iteration for the British Army is 1951 with the issue of the Infantry Training Series of manuals. These are the blue covered manuals, and you know these have some amendments issued after 1951, but none of them affect the spares listing. Now it's interesting because these largely revert to the G1098 that was issued in 1944. So there's a question of saying, well, look, okay, did these guys ignore the 1946 Small Arms Training Manual and go with the mobilisation tables? Or is it truly a case of we're at war again in the Korean War, and therefore we need a different level of spares from our peacetime establishment? So that's quite an interesting sort of theory. We can't prove it either way. We'd need to understand the drafts and the notes in preparing this, which we just don't have access to. So they probably don't even exist anymore. So we're going to go through and just show you again how much it actually changes once again. There are some minor changes that don't reflect the G1098 and perhaps a little bit of learning. So we do see the lever, bottom lever for the feed block reintroduced to the wallet, and the top lever for the feed block. Rather than the split pin being carried randomly in the case this time, though, it's actually being carried in the wallet alongside those items. We also have the asbestos packing that was previously in the case is now being carried as part of the wallet there, probably to protect it that little bit more. What we do see though is an additional firing pin being carried in the wallet. So we now have 2 of the firing pins, and you can see number 1 type and number 2 type next to each other there. And we have this washer leather for the oil brushes at the top of the crosspiece handles being carried in there as well. We see some removals though. We see one of these pull-throughs removed again. That's no longer carried. And we see the mirror, reflector mirror, no longer carried. And the jib spring, which is apparent in a moment as to why that's being removed. But we do see the wallet as it's set out there, then fitting into the case. The case has the addition of the 2 extractors, which is why it's unlikely that we need to carry the jib spring in there, because we have a replacement jib spring in here and then 2 quickly assembled in there. So the spare parts case in 1951 is the wallet alongside this can oil, lock spring, combination tool, spring balance, the 2 extractors and the clearing plug there. The changes come again though into the box. The box has a number of changes, which starting with the removals, we see these 2 small parts tins removed once again. We see the eyelets taken out, because again we're not going to be repairing belts, and out of with the eyelets we have the packing gland, as with the G1098 that comes out. We have one of the T-fixing rear cross piece pins taken out. We have the belt plug removed. We have one of the plugs for the front cover catch and the plunger for the front cover catch taken out. We have the long strips and the short strips both removed as well, alongside the belt repairing tool, because there's no need to repair the strip type belts. You have these small split pins, once again change terminology from pin split check nut long to pins keep split 1/16 inch by 1 inch. We then have a number of items added back into the box. We have the oil brush being added in there. We have the chain for the crosshead joint pin for the tripod. We have a chain being added there, and then we have the pins themselves being added and carried as spares. We have a cork, another cork for plug being added, so we've got those 2 of those in there now. We have the additional asbestos packing, so again we're going to put 4 more 5-yard lengths of asbestos packing into the spare parts box. And then we have 2 more firing pins being added, so we've got 4 in total. Critical components, we've got 4 of those. We have the screw clamp checking traverse reappear back into the spare parts box again per gun. We have a spring bottom pawl for the feed block being added in. We have the 2 rear cover lock springs, these 2 leaf springs, these being added back in as well. We have the jib spring, so actually it's a move, I suppose, from the wallet into the spare parts box rather than removal, but we have that being carried in the spare parts box now rather than the wallet. We have the 4 lock springs coming back in, so let's get these 1, 2, 3 and 4 being added back in, so we've got 8 in total. The 2 safety catch springs being added back in there, these ones with their little plunger on the end for the cross piece, so we've got 4 of those in total. Springs top pawl feed block going back in, so these flat leaf springs that fit in the top of the feed block there. We then have the 2 additional trigger bar springs, so we've got 4 of those being carried again. We've got 2 of the elevating nut washers being added back in, so we've got 6 being carried, and then we have 2 more wire gauze pieces being carried, so we've got 6 back up again of those. And that is what we see at the end of in 1951, and that's the last time that any spare parts are listed for British service Vickers machine guns. There is one further mention of a spare parts list in the archive that we have available, which is South Africa in the 1960s. However, this is a direct copy of the 1951 infantry training manual. So there's no change for the 1960s South African use of the Vickers as well. As a bit of a reflection of this video and just going over some of the things that are actually what's remarkable is some of the things that stayed in these spare parts boxes and everything all the way along and never changed. So the tools, the adjustable spanner, carrying a tangent sight, a spare tangent sight has been there all along. One collar, one roller and one collar for it. One fusee with chain, one fusee spring. Some of these things have been consistent throughout. We only saw one change to the discs being carried. We saw it move from 5 down to 4. Numbers of cups muzzle attachment have changed quite frequently. We've had one trigger and one tumbler pin in both the wallet and the box all the way along. We've clearly had a complete lock being carried all the time, but it is quite interesting to see how we've just had one tumbler and one trigger being carried in the wallet all the way through. No changes, hasn't appeared anywhere else at all. So yeah, it's quite remarkable to understand what has stayed the same rather than what's changed. We'll provide the listings and the our notes and everything throughout this. We've got the sort of additions and minuses that as we've gone along. Some of those have had to be changed as we've worked it out and worked through it. But these will be available as part of the additional material for the video. So I hope that's been interesting. We'll provide some snapshots of each of the years as well as screenshots out of the video, and try and update our website with all of the spare parts listings. So as I said, hopefully that's been interesting and informative. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and share the video and subscribe to the channel. Please support us on Patreon if you're able to, and let us know of anything you'd like to see in the future. I look forward to hearing from you.